A massive fire broke out in Krasnoyarsk after an explosion at Natek. A large-scale drone attack in Saratov. Russia has put the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces on the international wanted list. Negotiations have reached a deadlock due to territorial issues. Zelensky arrived in London for an emergency summit with the leaders of the European trio. The enemy is advancing on the front line. Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi announces intensified mobilization. The occupiers are deliberately targeting repair crews of energy workers in Kherson. Widespread and fervent protests have recently swept across the vast expanse of Russia, with numerous citizens actively taking to the streets in various cities to voice their strong opposition and profound discontent, specifically against the recently implemented and highly unpopular tax increases. Concurrently, a substantial sum, exceeding more than $15 million worth of valuable assets, has been officially seized from Timur Ivanov, who previously held the significant and influential position as the former deputy of Shoigu, marking a notable development in ongoing investigations. Across the expanses of YouTube, a massive fire in Russia. A fire is raging near the CHP plant in Krasnoyarsk, Russia, following explosions. This is being reported by Russian media. According to eyewitnesses, 2 explosions occurred near CHP-1. The Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations reported that tanks with gasoline and fuel pellets are burning. The fire has spread over 850 square meters. Local social media groups are actively sharing photos from the scene. Thick plumes of smoke and bright flames can be seen. There don't seem to be any casualties. There are also no reports about the causes of the explosions. And what do you think? Who could have had such bad luck with a cigarette? Share your guesses in the comments. The Investigative Committee of Russia has put the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, known by the call sign Madyar, on the international wanted list. Madyar himself responded to this with irony.
And remember, you worms, in your own swampy language, Anushka has already spilled the oil.
So Madyar referenced a quote from the work of Russian writer Bulgakov, which means the inevitability of fate and the consequences of one's actions. And in fact, about Anushka, who has already spilled the oil. On the night of December 8th, the Russians once again couldn't sleep. Here are some shots from Engels. And this is already the second attack there in 2 days.
Well, just watch. Well, it doesn't really come across on camera, but there, do you see? Something is really strong, red, foggy, really strong. The apartment building is actually blurring. And over there, well, like that.
It was also restless in the occupied part of the Donetsk agglomeration. According to local social media pages, the attack targeted the energy sector specifically. And as a result, in the occupied Mariupol and Volnovakha, electricity was partially lost. Volgograd, Tula, and the Rostov region also came under attack by Ukrainian drones, and the operation of Russian air defense was recorded in Moscow and the Leningrad region. The General Staff, for its part, confirmed that a number of targets in the temporarily occupied territories were hit.
With the aim of disrupting the enemy's logistics system in the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region, an ammunition depot was struck near Chmyrivka. In the area of temporarily occupied Donetsk, a depot of UAVs belonging to the Russian occupiers was hit. In addition, in order to weaken the enemy's ability to store and transport fuel and lubricants. A fuel and lubricants depot of an enemy unit was struck near Seymakin in Luhansk region. Also, in order to reduce the occupiers' air defense capabilities, a mobile fire group, Panzer S1, was hit in Donetsk region.
Well, what can I say? I definitely like how it all burns. As they say, let it burn bright so it doesn't go out. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such sensible viewers. Write in the comments under this episode where you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And for now, we continue. The most interesting part is coming up. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi stated that we have no other choice because of the enemy's offensive. Ukraine must intensify mobilization and strengthen its army in order to later repel the full-scale Russian aggression.
The key focus of our efforts is not hardware, but people. mobilization, recruitment, new contracts, and consequently high-quality training. When it comes to personnel training, we cannot stand still. We must develop and move forward.
And now, here is our overview of what is happening on and around the front lines at this very moment.
Along the more than 1,250-kilometer front line, over 710,000 Russian occupiers have been deployed. Despite the enemy army's impressive numbers, Ukraine's defense forces have advanced in 4 directions, while the Russians have only advanced in 1.
Putin has repeatedly claimed that it has been captured. Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, Kostiantynivka, not to mention others, all of them. Kupiansk, especially there, they raised their flags several times, and even Putin himself, not just being briefed, but personally announced that the city had been captured, just like Vovchansk. In other words, he needs to demonstrate the actual capture of territory and show us that offensive operations will continue. And if we don't make concessions, especially if we don't give up Donetsk region completely, then accordingly, he will continue to develop offensive operations in the winter, intensifying them. He increases pressure on the front and also steps up pressure on the rear, on ordinary civilians, on the energy sector, so that people freeze in winter to sow panic and doubt. And in these few months, actually achieve his goals. At the first stage, this means a ceasefire on his terms and the signing of a peace agreement. And then preparation for possible new operations.
The Russians struck the dam of the Pechenihi Reservoir in the Kharkiv region. Traffic on the road surface has been stopped. The American Institute for the Study of War does not confirm the Russians' claims of success. In the southern part of Vovchansk and in the Kupiansk district,
Reporting from the Vovchansk direction. Here it is. Mainila.
one Russian war correspondent claimed that their troops advanced in the southern part of Vovchansk, while another said that the Russians had captured the village of Lyman and control 80% of Vovchansk. The occupiers are using the tactic of shading in areas they claim to have captured. In many cases, fighting is still ongoing in these territories, and it's too early to talk about them being captured.
This is Sinta from the Creamy Whim project. It was recorded that events are taking place 500 meters deep into territory that they themselves had previously shaded as being under Russian control. In general, there are the most questions about the shading done by this particular project. For them, literally, the defeat of a lone Russian soldier by an FPV drone is a reason to shade in a couple of kilometers up to the place where it happened. But at the same time, it's important to remember that control under current conditions is a very relative concept, especially in cities. Because while infiltration across open terrain is at least somewhat difficult, urban neighborhoods where it's easy to hide from drones are basically wide open. So for now, all we can say is that fighting is taking place in the area that was previously shaded as Russian, which in itself is not bad.
Russian forces have continued combat operations in the Zaporizhzhia region. In particular, the occupiers attacked near Huliaipol and Orikhiv. However, there are no confirmed changes to the front line.
At Huliaipol, activity is unlikely to be any less today. Our assault unit is also operating here. You know that the Russians, from time to time, they also spread fake reports claiming they've advanced somewhere. Obviously, these fake reports are primarily aimed at Ukrainian society in order to create a certain emotional atmosphere.
On November 21st, propaganda channels released a video showing soldiers holding the Russian Federation flag in the Oleksandrivka direction, claiming the occupation of Tikhe and Otradne. Ukrainian soldiers have liberated the village of Tikhe in the Sinelnikove district of Dnipropetrovsk region from the occupiers. There is video evidence to confirm this. Ukrainian warriors continue to defend Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. In a video published on December 6th, 3 Ukrainian soldiers raised the flag on Yakub Kolas Lane in the northern part of the city, which indicates holding positions. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine called this stage of the defense extremely difficult.
Our strategy is to exhaust the Russian army as much as possible, to prevent its advance, to hold our territory simultaneously, striking the enemy in the rear in operational depth and even on Russian territory itself. with the aim of undermining its defensive potential and industrial capabilities.
General Alexander Syrskyi also stated in an interview that Ukrainian forces are holding their positions in the north of Pokrovsk.
The Ukrainian army is conducting a strategic defensive operation aimed at restraining the enemy's advance, preventing its breakthrough deeper inside, inflicting maximum losses, and carrying out counteroffensive actions in those sectors where we see the enemy's vulnerabilities. At
the same time, the Russians have managed to significantly complicate Ukrainian logistics in the Pokrovsk direction. The occupiers' goal is to completely cut off Ukrainian supply and evacuation routes. But they have still not managed to encircle the Ukrainian garrisons in either city. This is also confirmed by the American Institute for the Study of War.
Ukrainian forces maintain limited logistics in the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad direction. However, Russian troops are very likely able to disrupt Ukrainian evacuation routes and ground lines of communication using artillery and drones.
The defense forces are trying to organize additional logistical routes to supply their units. Throughout the week, the main direction was the north of Donetsk region. It was there that the Russians were transferring manpower. The transfers were carried out in columns accompanied by military police.
The dominant direction this week was the north of Donetsk region. From the Berdyansk direction, through the city of Mariupol towards Volnovakha, between 10 and 20 trucks were observed daily, mostly carrying personnel and without tactical markings. This indicates new units after training and matches the training schedule. Despite
the heavy losses, the pace of the Russian Federation's offensive is increasing. At the same time, Russia continues to intensify its strikes on Ukrainian cities. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They are holding the front and standing up to a vast horde that greatly outnumbers them. That is why I urge everyone to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you are not able to do so financially, write them words of support in the comments. I know they are watching us.
This video should be in The Hague. We know that Russia violates all laws, including the laws of war. And here is yet another piece of evidence. This is Kherson. The day before, the Russians deliberately targeted repair crews several times as they tried to fix the thermal power plant. In fact, they themselves published this video. That is why the Russians are openly warning everyone in broad daylight that every repair crew and utility service is now a military target for them. Russia is a terrorist state that has once again hit a new low. Like if you agree. And now about the peace agreement. Donald Trump has once again made statements that he is somewhat disappointed in Zelensky and that the Ukrainian leader allegedly hasn't read the peace plan.
Also, in addition to that, furthermore, it is important to note that
Ukrainian President Zelensky made a statement as well.
there is a vision from the US, Russia and Ukraine, and we do not have a unified opinion regarding Donbas, he said, adding that Kyiv insists on a separate agreement on security guarantees from Western allies, primarily from the United States of America. There is one question that I and all Ukrainians want answered. If Russia starts a war again, what will our partners do? Zelensky said.
And what do you think? Are the states really ready to sell out Ukraine? Write your thoughts. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in London. In the British capital, the head of the Ukrainian state will hold a series of bilateral meetings, including with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Together, they will discuss the situation in Ukraine and the progress of negotiations mediated by the United States. The agenda also includes discussions on security issues and support packages for Ukraine's defense, which remain key topics of this diplomatic week. For now, we will continue to follow the visit, await further details, and be sure to tell you all about it in our upcoming broadcasts. Goodbye, Europe. Donald Trump is leaving a longtime partner and is telling Europeans that, when it comes to defense, they should rely only on themselves. Americans are no longer hiding their plans and are openly discussing them at closed meetings with diplomats. The truth is, it's just around the corner. The US has midterm elections coming up, so Donald Trump is trying to sit on two chairs at once. More about the new global security system in our report.
Trump is abandoning, or rather throwing Europe under the bus. Washington no longer wants to be the main guarantor of the EU's security. According to Western media, the Trump administration has informed European allies at closed meetings that after 2027, the US will no longer be the main force in NATO. The responsibility for the alliance's defense will supposedly fall solely on the shoulders
of Europe itself. However,
despite all the alarmism for European leaders, such behavior from the White House administration did not come as a surprise. The Pentagon had already warned that it planned to reduce its role in NATO's defense. Now, however, it sounded like a tough ultimatum.
But in essence, he is stepping back from NATO, then narrowing his focus and concentrating on changing the mainstream centrist forces in Europe. And he declares that the United States will be more actively involved in influencing such changes.
However, the Trump administration does not plan to reduce the number of American troops in Europe.
The United States is and remains our most important ally in the alliance. However, the NATO bloc is focused on addressing political and security issues.
In fact, the ultimatum presented to the member countries of the alliance actually works in their favor. In reality, the Pentagon will only reduce the number of high-ranking American officers in NATO's command structure. Some of these positions will be transferred to Europeans. And Donald Trump also wants the EU to start buying weapons from the US.
Among the winners, in terms of time, resources, and attention, are the Western Hemisphere and possibly the Pacific region. Sorry, but among the losers is Europe. It ends up in the red. This administration is basically saying, good luck to all of you.
But there's no need to worry. Unlike Europe, Ukraine will always have everything it needs from Trump. Weapons and support. Despite the strategic shift, American officials swear by it. Weapons deliveries to Kyiv are not being suspended. And a significant increase is even expected by Christmas.
A list of Ukraine's priority needs. The Ukrainian side submits a request for what is most relevant at the moment. And the purchase is made.
It seems Trump has finally given up on the idea of talking sense into Putin. So on the eve of 2026, the American president decided to move on to Plan B, the famous peace through strength.
Russia is ramping up the intensity of its hybrid attacks. But the Kremlin thug only understands the language of force. Only that. That's why any attempts to negotiate after yet another aggressive scenario from Russia, like this one for example, Putin will interpret as weakness, as Europe's weakness, and will push even harder.
However, no matter how hard Putin presses on Europe, he himself is under even greater pressure.
This war has been going on for 4 years now, and over 1 million lives have been lost there. They will never conquer Ukraine. And as for resources, just look at what Nabiulina said. Just a week ago, what did she say? It's no longer about fighting for money. Now it's about fighting for patriotism. Yes, all the regions from which people are fighting have started to receive large sums of money. And besides the fact that the military-industrial complex is working around the clock there, and besides paying big money, people are fighting on the front lines. But it's not a bottomless barrel.
Meanwhile, analysts assure that Ukraine will continue to receive military aid from the US and our European partners.
Judging by the position of Donald Trump himself, even if he says, this is not my war, I will not take part in it, he is still profiting from this war, and he will continue to profit. And he will sell these weapons to the Europeans, and the Europeans will pay and supply these weapons to you.
And no matter how many loud statements are made in the White House regarding NATO, it will not affect Ukraine in any way. After all, Trump needs us to create his ideal image as a peacemaker, much more than it might seem. At the same time, as the strikes deeper into Russia become more regular, support is also growing for the American president himself.
Donald Trump has no other options. Either he has to distance himself, but he won't be able to, because in America, in a year, there will be midterm elections. In America, public opinion, including among his own supporters, supports Ukraine. That's why he'll have to maneuver. He won't be as categorical as we heard at the very beginning of his term.
Russia is supplying gas to China, bypassing American sanctions. The vessel Valera delivered liquefied gas to the Chinese port of Beihai. This was reported by Bloomberg. In addition, another project subject to sanctions. The Russian Arctic LNG 2 project in Siberia began supplying fuel to Beihai back in August. Beijing is openly ignoring U.S. demands to stop trading Russian oil, which is a key issue in trade negotiations.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
He worked in the corrupt Ministry of Defense, led a double life, and I knew nothing about the billions stolen from the army. One of the richest officials in the Russian Ministry of Defense, former deputy to Shoigu Timur Ivanov, had assets worth more than $15 million seized. Now his ex-wife is asking the court to return all the property to her, since she claims she had no idea what a depraved place it was. Her husband worked for 10 years. Details of the high-profile scandal in Russia's defense sector are coming up next.
One of the most high-profile corruption cases in Russia in recent years has received further development, or rather, a conclusion. The former deputy and likewise former Minister of Defense under Shoigu, Timur Ivanov, who was accused of bribery and embezzlement of state funds, has been ruined. Well,
let me just reread the criminal code, because some people think that our punishment is too harsh.
In July, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison, and on December 5th, the court seized his assets in favor of the state. Ivanov's assets amounting to $15 million. Reading out the full list of confiscated property took 47 minutes. From
the 50-year-old Ivanov, among other things, they seized land plots and an estate in Razdory with an area of almost 800 square meters. The Sofia Volkonskaya mansion on Chisty Perulok in the capital. Dozens of cars. Premium class 170 pieces of jewelry weighing more than 2.5 kilograms and over 40 pairs of watches, in total worth 1.2 billion rubles.
All of this wealth, Timur Ivanov accumulated over many years spent at the Kremlin trough as the chief builder of the Russian Ministry of Defense. Ivanov was even building an occupied and destroyed Mariupol.
Indeed, there will be a new modern district with kindergartens in schools and extensive infrastructure planned. Plus, we even plan to build an ice rink and a swimming pool. So all of this will be for the use of the city's residents, and I hope they will get the most enjoyment out of living in this building.
He kept building until they finally cornered him in 2024, caught him by the tail. And there are rumors that corruption is just a cover. In reality, Ivanov is being punished for treason. One way or another, there is a verdict.
We have to proceed from reality. And
now to the most interesting part. Ivanov's ex-wife, Svetlana Zakharova, in her attempts to get the property back, claimed in court that she had no idea about his earnings. The ex-wife. And in general, she tried to talk Ivanov out of working at the ministry since there was nothing but debauchery there.
According to her, when Ivanov was offered the position of deputy minister at the Ministry of Defense, she was categorically against it. She was convinced that it would destroy our family relationships because of the extreme debauchery. The depraved and low moral atmosphere within that team.
Svetlana Zakharova does not specify exactly what kind of debauchery she is referring to, but if we're talking about debauchery as a lack of shame and modesty, then we have an option. Money. Money, in which Svetlana Zakharova, while married to Ivanov, was rolling like cheese in butter.
Every year, starting from at least 2010, Timur Ivanov's family would leave for the entire month of August, not to work in the garden at their dacha, but to vacation on the Côte d'Azur. Every year they rented huge villas there. For example, this one. 5 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 2 rooms for staff. A month's rent for it in 2013 cost 120,000 euros. That same summer they paid another 90,000 euros for rent for this 37-meter yacht. All August long, Ivanov's wife's Instagram is once again filled with photos from Saint-Tropez. Timur Ivanov celebrated his birthday there again. 25 guests arrived. This time they rented the Villa Manguera. It has its own helipad, tennis court and swimming pool. A night there costs from 5,500 euros. And in 2017 they stayed at the very same villa. So once again, they spent 170,000 euros for a month's rent. And that same summer, they rented a yacht like this one.
In just 6 years of such regular vacations on the Côte d'Azur, the Ivanov family spent almost 1.5 million euros. 1.3 million for a total of half a year. At the same time, the Ivanov's official annual income is about 25 million rubles or $330,000. Yes, that's correct. Almost the entire annual family budget was blown in a month in San Rafael.
We are ready to carry out any task, so the military construction complex and the Ministry of Defense are always prepared to fulfill any assignment.
And all this luxury was paid for with money that Svetlana Zakharova supposedly knew nothing about. She supposedly didn't know, yet she was buying antiques, jewelry, designer clothes, real estate, and furnishing a mansion in the center of Moscow. And
now let's take a look at just 1 year of expenses, 2020 for example. On various antiques, vases, sculptures, chandeliers, and furniture, Svetlana spent over 9 million rubles. 1.7 million on fabrics, 1 million on bathroom accessories, 3 million for repairs on some yacht. She spent over 700,000 for a year of horse maintenance. That same year, she bought out her ex-husband's half of an apartment in a luxury residential complex on Povarskaya for $1.2 million. 90 million rubles. And of course, endless shopping for clothes. And that's only what left traces in the email. The real scale was much greater. And
everyone knows that here, on Zakatievsky Lane, they rent a 300 square meter apartment. And here, in the village of Uspenskoye, on Rublievskoye Highway, they built themselves a dacha with an area of 1,600 square meters. A place like that costs about 600 million rubles. But all of this is just crumbs, compared to what they actually have. In 2012, Timur Ivanov decided to build a noble nest for his lady, Svetlana. Right in the center of Moscow, at 4 Chisty Lane, there is a real noble estate. A mansion in the classical style. A large main house, 3 stories, almost 1,000 square meters. It was built in 1821. It was called the Volkonskaya von Meck City Estate. In 2012, Timur Ivanov bought this building for 600 million rubles.
But Ivanov's ex-wife will never reach her former level of luxury again. Of everything Zakharova asked to have returned, the court left her only a 2004 Rolls-Royce.
She requested to have 13 pieces of jewelry legally belonging to her and her underage daughter, as well as 2 pairs of wristwatches and 3 cars. This referred to a ring by Graf purchased at a Christie's auction, as well as Cartier and Van Cleef pieces, which, according to her, she acquired during her first marriage.
Out of the 2.5 kilograms of seized jewelry, she did not get anything back. Ivanov's new partner is Maria Kitayeva, a former colleague from the ministry and a TV host.
There was a ring with which her first husband proposed and the children's bracelets. Kitayeva also asked not to seize the house in the village of Razdori, where she and her 4 children lived together with Ivanov, until his arrest. According to her, it is the only place of residence for the children, the youngest of whom is not even 2 years old.
But let's get back to the topic of debauchery in the Ministry of Defense. We can talk not only about immense wealth, but also in the context of having mistresses. And as practice has shown, all high-ranking officials of the Russian Ministry of Defense have them.
The more, in fact, the better.
The already mentioned Sergei Shoigu spends his time in the company of a certain Elena Shebunova. She, as befits the companion of an official of such rank, is no ordinary woman. And she holds the status of a billionaire who, thanks to Shoigu, made money on contracts with the Ministry of Emergency Situations and the Ministry of Defense, making money off defense. The chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, also got his mistress accustomed to this. A month ago, Russian media reported that he had found a job for his mistress, Elena Selifanova. At the Ministry of Defense, Gerasimov's companion worked there for 5 years and then resigned. For her fruitful work, Selifanova received quite a bit. The rank of first-class state service referent and 2 apartments in Moscow. Unlike Ivanov's ex-wife, these women prefer luxury in silence. Perhaps it's because of their status as mistresses, but that's unlikely. After all, there's another woman who, even as a mistress, isn't shy about her wealthy lifestyle. Maria Shaleva. Rossiya Media linked her to the Russian Minister of Defense through Love and Money. Andrei Belousov. The news broke in July after a girl posted a video of herself flying a military plane into a closed airport. After the scandal, Shaleva deleted the post at the request of her Kremlin patrons, and pro-Kremlin media wrote about it. They claimed that Belousov was being set up. They even supposedly found Shaleva's real suitor, a serviceman in the Russian Air Force. The scandal died down, but questions remained.
It just looks idiotic.
So, what kind of debauchery in the Ministry of Defense is former corrupt official Ivanova actually talking about?
Protests are spreading across Russia. In Irkutsk, Russians took to the streets to protest against tax increases. Attention! Under the slogans for victory, for Putin, the very person who signed this decree himself.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, using the Constitution and the laws of Russia, exercising your right of veto and other mechanisms within the framework of legislative initiatives, return the law for reconsideration. Let us keep the opportunity to live and work.
The protesters stated that they support the fight against fascism, are forging victory, helping the army, and buying drones. But the tax increase will force them to shut down their businesses. That's why the entrepreneurs asked the Tsar father to veto the already signed law and send it back for reconsideration. When it was pointed out that nothing like this had ever happened in Russian history, the organizer replied that everything happens for the first time.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, please use your strong right hand.
Veto! Veto! And what do you think of all this cringe in Russian? Write your thoughts, don't hold back in the comments. The year 2026 could become the year of the wave of Islamic terror for Russia if urgent measures are not taken. Such a warning came from within the FSB itself. A radical cell was uncovered in Bashkiria. Their main goal is the creation of a world caliphate. A report stating that Islamic terrorism is rearing its head in the heart of Russia is already on the desk of FSB chief Alexander Bortnikov. Moscow and major cities are in a special risk zone. Is the evil empire facing a new threat? A new crocus, or something even more terrifying? Our journalists investigated. These are the scenes now being actively broadcast on Russian television. These show FSB officers detaining a cell of international terrorists in Bashkiria who was spreading the idea of creating a world caliphate. The 8 detainees were preaching the ideology of a group banned in Russia among Muslims. During underground gatherings, this terrorist organization recruited others into their ranks. But lately, such footage has become increasingly rare on Russian TV. And the key points in them are that the FSB has reported a growing threat of terrorist attacks within the country.
From time to time in Russia, a target for public anger is created. Most of the time, it's always some external force. But occasionally, there's a need to start stirring up the situation.
Russian security services are recording a rise in Islamic terrorism in Russia. According to media reports, such a report was received by FSB chief Alexander Bortnikov, but has not yet been passed on to the Russian dictator Putin. However, as other sources report, the document may in fact have ended up on Putin's desk after all. And interestingly, among the key threats is also the increased activity of certain sabotage groups within the country. That is far from the so-called Special Military Operations Zone, including in the capital itself, Moscow. And another important point concerns the threat of destabilization in the Caucasus.
Actions that were meant to show that the state is strong, that there are enemies, and that they will deal with them. This is the strong Putin and yet more enemies who want to attack the besieged fortress. And
here, let's return to the previously mentioned information about the arrests in Bashkiria, where, according to the FSB, they managed to catch 8 members of a terrorist organization. At that time, it was also reported that the group was preparing active operations on Russian territory. The sources who provided this information. The media agree that in 2026, the situation could get worse if the FSB and other agencies do not make this vector a priority. But here, it's important to remember that such messages are not just announced in Russia for no reason. These are well-planned provocations. Also, such terrorist attacks could indeed be organized by Russian special services, since this serves both domestic and foreign audiences. For Russians themselves, this is just a banal attempt to destabilize the situation.
these statements will definitely be followed by terrorist attacks. There definitely will be, or most likely, there will be suspects who are detained or killed who will have certain documents or affiliations with one terrorist organization or another, or some national background. This will be sold to the domestic audience. This is how Russians have always been frightened.
We all remember this well, the terrorist attack at Crocus, which Putin used to accuse the so-called neo-Nazi Kyiv regime.
On the coordinator's orders, the terrorists, after committing the crime, drove by car toward the Russian-Ukrainian border, intending to then reach Kyiv to receive the promised reward.
It's a rather complicated narrative. As far as I understand, there were initial reports from the FSB, as well as from FSB-affiliated Telegram channels, stating that there was some kind of cache where weapons were stored, which had been prepared for these four individuals so that they could take these weapons. At least that's the idea as I understand it, and then break through toward Ukraine with them. No evidence. So far, we haven't seen any proof that this cache exists.
As a result, this tragedy became a tool for mobilizing society and a trigger for a new wave of signing volunteer contracts with the Russian Ministry of Death. But for the external audience, creating a fake is not so easy. First and foremost, because it would have to be linked to Ukraine again. And that's exactly what is critically important for the Kremlin right now. Critically important.
If this is used in the Ukraine case, if, for example, they once again find Budanov's business card, so to speak, then it won't be sold domestically. Most likely it will be sold abroad. And the United States, look, they don't play by the rules of war.
Other experts are saying the same thing.
There's a whole series of activities from the FSB. This is preparation for terrorist attacks both in Russia and in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the goal is to demoralize society against the backdrop of scandals, power outages, and the situation at the front. In Russia, it's to stir up the population in order to justify a new wave of mobilization.
Simply put, the Russian ruling regime is quite capable of staging a series of terrorist attacks inside the country itself, then blaming everything on Ukraine and trying to use that as leverage in negotiations. Or to completely intimidate Russians and drive them into total mobilization. What do you think of our news? Let us know what we should change. To become better, we will definitely take your feedback into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you soon.